The bollards went in on a Saturday morning. Karen's Audi was already in my driveway when the contractor arrived at 7. I had known it would be. She had parked there Friday night, the 51st time in 2 years and 9 months, the 51st entry in a notebook that had begun as professional caution and had become, across 1,023 days of documented patience, the most complete record of a single recurring trespass I had ever assembled. I had known she would park there Friday night because she had parked there every Thursday or Friday night for the preceding 6 months, as though the weekend anchor established some form of claim that weekday parking could not. I had documented this sub-pattern beginning in month 22. The human mind finds patterns, and Karen's mind had apparently found a pattern in her own behavior without understanding that mine had found it too. The contractor was a man named Terrence Webb, licensed in Garfield County, who had installed similar deterrent systems on 3 other properties in the valley and who had reviewed my installation specification with the professional appreciation of someone who recognized well-prepared documentation when he saw it. He looked at the Audi when he arrived, looked at me, said nothing. I said, work around it. He said, the center post goes approximately 8 feet in front of the driver's door. I said, I know. He set the first form at 7:14. The bollards were not decorative. They were not a statement. They were a permitted installation, 3 steel posts, 4 inches in diameter, set in concrete footings 24 inches deep, positioned at the driveway entrance in a configuration that would, when complete, prevent any vehicle from entering the driveway while allowing pedestrian access on both sides. The configuration had been designed to accommodate the Audi's current position. The posts would go in around the car, in front of the car, and to the car's left and right at angles calculated to prevent exit across the grass without high centering or significant paint damage to a vehicle that would not, under normal circumstances, clear the post's spacing without contact. I had measured the Audi's dimensions 11 months earlier when it was parked in my driveway for the 29th time. I had measured it with a tape measure, methodically, from the driveway's concrete surface. I had been planning this for 11 months. The concrete went in at 9:47 Saturday morning. By noon, the first posts were plumb and set, and the concrete was curing in the October sun at a rate Terrence estimated would produce structural integrity by Sunday morning. I photographed the installation at every stage: the forms, the concrete pour, the post placement, the final cured positions, 47 photographs with timestamps, the Audi visible in 17 of them, sitting inside what had become, by noon Saturday, a permanent architectural feature of my property. I went inside at 12:15 and made lunch. Karen knocked on my door at 2:43. She had come home from wherever she had been, seen the posts, seen her Audi between them, seen the curing concrete, and made the specific calculation of a person who has just understood that a situation is significantly different than they expected. I opened the door. She said, "What did you do?" I said, "I installed a permitted vehicular deterrent system on my private driveway." She said, "My car is inside it." I said, "Yes." She said, "How do I get it out?" I said, "The concrete needs 72 hours to achieve full structural strength. After that, a flatbed tow truck can remove the vehicle without contact with the posts." She stared at me. I said, "I have documentation of 51 unauthorized parking incidents spanning 2 years and 9 months. I have 2 certified letters you signed for. I have a police report. I have an HOA board finding. The installation is permitted by Garfield County, notified to the HOA board in writing on Thursday, and fully within my property boundary as confirmed by a recent survey." She said, "You planned this?" I said, "Yes." She called the police at 2:59. She called the HOA board president at 3:04. She called an attorney at 3:22. All 3 told her the same thing. What happened in the weeks after that Saturday, what the attorney found when he reviewed my documentation, what the HOA board concluded when they understood the full record, what 51 entries in a notebook produced when they were finally the subject of the formal attention they had been building toward. None of that was about the bollards. The bollards were just the Saturday Karen learned what 2 years and 9 months of documentation looks like when it reaches its conclusion. My name is Aldous Reeve, 50 years old, 23 years as a licensed civil engineer specializing in site infrastructure and access systems. I design driveways, parking configurations, access controls, and the built features that govern how vehicles move through private and public space. I understand, with the professional depth of someone who has spent 2 decades on these problems, exactly what a driveway is and what it means and who owns it, and what the consequences are when someone treats ownership as optional. My wife Cecilia is a contracts attorney. She has spent 17 years in practice examining agreements, what they contain, what they omit, what they imply, and what happens when a party behaves as though an agreement exists that has never been made. We had lived in our home in Ridgecrest Commons for 4 years, a 3-bedroom contemporary on a corner lot in a 51-home HOA outside Aspen, Colorado, a neighborhood at the specific intersection of natural beauty and residential investment, where the houses were well built, and the residents had generally achieved the financial position that allowed them to live there and understood that property rights were taken seriously at this elevation. The driveway was the distinguishing feature of the corner lot. Wide, long, finished in stamped concrete that I had specified and installed in year 2 because the original asphalt was below the standard I applied to my own property. It was visible from 2 streets, clearly private, clearly mine, with a post at the street edge bearing our house number and no feature suggesting public access. Karen Whitmoreslade lived in the house that sat at the corner intersection behind ours. Her property wrapped the northwest corner, her front driveway faced one street, and her rear parking area connected to the alley that ran between our properties. Her own driveway was narrow, awkward for her Audi Q7, and positioned in a way that made backing out onto the busier of the 2 streets a maneuver requiring attention. My driveway, from Karen's perspective, was a significantly more convenient option. Wide, with a pull-through configuration that allowed entry from one direction and exit in the other without reversing, closer to her preferred direction of morning travel, substantially easier in every practical dimension. She had used it the first time 6 weeks after we moved in. I assumed it was a mistake, unfamiliar neighborhood, similar street configurations, honest error. I left a note on her windshield. The second time, 3 weeks later, I knocked on her door and explained that the driveway was private. She apologized. She seemed genuine. The third time, I began the notebook. 23 years of civil engineering had given me an unambiguous belief in the documentation of site conditions. If something is happening on a site and you do not document it, it is not happening in any form that can be used. If you document it contemporaneously, accurately, and completely, it exists in a form that endures. I documented everything: date, time, duration, photographs from the driveway camera I had installed after the 3rd incident, and any conversation or communication related to the incident. Every entry written within 24 hours. Every photograph preserved in cloud backup with original metadata intact. Over 2 years and 9 months, I made 50 more entries. The pattern was geometrically rational. Karen's morning routine required her to leave her property in a direction that her own driveway made difficult. My driveway made it easy. She had used it once and found it easy, and had continued using it with the specific persistence of someone who has found a solution that works and has decided, without fully articulating the decision, to continue using it until something stops her. Nothing had stopped her. That was the problem I had spent 2 years and 9 months trying to solve through means that were not the bollards. I sent the first certified letter at month 7, 14 incidents, Colorado Revised Statute 1845-4 on criminal trespass, camera evidence for 11 of the 14, request for written acknowledgement of cessation. Karen came to my door 48 hours later. She was organized and direct. A former commercial real estate broker, she had the professional capability to engage with a difficult conversation without losing composure. She said she had not realized how many times it had happened. She said it was not intentional. She fell into convenient patterns without fully registering them as patterns. She said she would stop. She did not stop. At month 16, I had 33 entries. Cecilia had reviewed the notebook twice. After the second review, she said, in the specific language of a contracts attorney assessing a recurring breach situation, that Karen had identified our complaint process as a constraint that she could accommodate through periodic apology without changing her underlying behavior. The second certified letter went out at month 16, 33 incidents, both letter receipts. The police report from month 13 when Karen had parked in my driveway while Cecilia was attempting to use it and had declined to move immediately when asked. The HOA board finding from month 15 when the board had formally notified Karen that her use of my driveway was unacceptable and had asked her to stop. Karen's response to the second certified letter was to send a letter of her own, through her attorney, proposing a mediated discussion about a formal parking arrangement. I was not interested in a formal parking arrangement. I was interested in the parking stopping. The attorney letter was entry 34. By month 24, I had 44 entries, a second police report, a second HOA board finding. The board had formally censured Karen at the month 22 meeting after I presented the complete documentation, and a clear picture of a person who had, over 2 years, treated every intervention as a temporary inconvenience rather than a genuine boundary. Cecilia said, after the second police report, the documentation is complete. It's been complete for 6 months. The question is what physical intervention ends this. I had been thinking about this since month 18. The bollard system had been the answer since month 19 when I had worked through the engineering. 3 posts, correctly spaced, in concrete footings at the driveway entrance would prevent vehicle entry entirely. The corner lot geometry meant the bollards would be visible from both streets and would serve a legitimate aesthetic and safety function, defining the driveway boundary clearly, preventing casual encroachment from either street, in addition to the specific deterrent function. I had pulled the permit in month 23. Garfield County's permit process for residential vehicular deterrent installations required a site plan, the structural specification for the footings, and a property boundary confirmation. I provided all 3. The property boundary confirmation was from a survey I had conducted myself, because I am a civil engineer who surveys my own property when I need the documentation. The permit was approved in 3 weeks. I had notified the HOA board on Thursday, 2 days before the installation. Brief, formal, noting the permit number and the installation date. The board president, a retired architect named Patricia Hale, who had seen the complete documentation and had voted for both formal board findings against Karen, acknowledged receipt without objection. I had not notified Karen. I had notified her twice in certified letters over 16 months. She had signed for both, promised cessation, and continued parking in my driveway 23 more times after the first letter and 17 more after the second. The notification cycle had produced a consistent and documented result, no behavioral change. What the notification cycle had not produced was what I was about to install. Friday night at 9:57, Karen's Audi pulled into my driveway, entry 51. I took the photograph from the upstairs window, added it to the notebook, went to bed. Terence arrived at 7 Saturday morning. The police arrived at 3:15 Saturday afternoon, following Karen's call. Officer Amanda Petrov had been to my property twice before, once for the first police report in month 13 and once for the second in month 22. She recognized my address when the dispatch came through, she told me later, and had pulled both prior reports before arriving. She walked the installation with me. I showed her the permit, the boundary survey confirmation, the HOA notification. She reviewed the spacing, the posts were within my property line, the concrete footings were within my property line, nothing extended to the street or the sidewalk. She looked at the Audi, sitting between the posts, with the front post approximately 7 feet ahead of the bumper. She said, "The car can't get out." I said, "Not without a flatbed." The post spacing prevents forward movement without contact. Reverse is possible, but exits onto the grass strip, which is also my property. She said, "Is the grass strip surveyed?" I handed her the survey document with the boundary marked. She said, "You've been planning this." I said, 2 years and 9 months. She was quiet for a moment. "The documentation you gave us for the second report, how current is it?" "The notebook runs through last night," I said, 51 entries. She looked at the Audi one more time. "I'll speak with the caller." She was at Karen's door for 11 minutes. I watched from my front porch. Karen was visible at one point, animated, pointing toward my driveway. Officer Petrov was still. She wrote things in her notebook. She came back. She said, "The caller is alleging the installation is retaliatory and was designed specifically to trap her vehicle." I said, "The installation is permitted by the county and notified to the HOA board 2 days before the work. It is a vehicular deterrent system on my private property. The fact that a vehicle that was unlawfully on my property when the installation was completed is now within the installation perimeter is a consequence of the vehicle's presence on my property without my authorization." She looked at her own notebook. Then she said she signed for 2 certified letters. "Both," I said, "receipts are in the documentation file." And the HOA censured her. Formally, at the month 22 meeting, the board minutes are in the file. She closed her notebook. "Sir, everything here is within your rights. The installation is legal, the vehicle is on your private property without your permission, and the consequence of its current position is the vehicle owner's responsibility to resolve." She paused. "I'll advise her to contact a tow service." She went back to Karen's door and delivered that advice. Karen's reaction was not visible from my porch at that distance, but I heard, clearly, the specific sound of a door closing firmly. Officer Petrov walked back to her cruiser. She paused at the edge of my driveway and looked at the Audi one more time. She said, without turning toward me, 2 years and 9 months. I said, "Yes." She got in her cruiser and drove away. The HOA board meeting was the following Wednesday. Patricia Hale had called it because the membership deserved an accurate account of what had happened and because the board's record needed to be complete. 29 of 51 homeowners attended, above average for Ridgecrest Commons, where the typical meeting drew 18 to 22. I presented the documentation myself, not all 51 entries, a representative selection that established the pattern, the escalation, the certified letters, the police reports, the board findings, and the installation, the permit, the survey, the notification. Karen attended with her attorney, Marcus Webb, who had the specific quality of an attorney who has reviewed the documentation and understands his client's position, and is present primarily to ensure the board process remains procedurally correct. He interjected twice. Patricia acknowledged both interjections and overruled them on procedural grounds, which she had the authority to do. Karen spoke when Patricia gave her the floor. She said the installation had been designed as a trap. She said the timing, completing the installation around her vehicle, was vindictive. She said the documentation I had assembled over 2 years and 9 months reflected an obsessive focus on a minor parking habit rather than a genuine property rights concern. Patricia asked her how many certified letters she had received. 2. Patricia asked whether she had continued parking in my driveway after receiving the second letter. A pause. She said she had occasionally found herself in my driveway without having fully registered the decision. Patricia said 17 times after the second certified letter. That's what the documentation shows. Does that number seem inconsistent with the documentation? Karen said she could not verify the specific number. Patricia said the board has seen the documentation. The board censured you at the month 22 meeting. You continued afterward. She looked at the table. The board's position has been clear. The homeowner's position has been clear. The installation resolves the situation structurally. The board has no basis for any action against it. The vote was 5-0, including Karen's single potential ally on the board, a woman named Donna Strand, who had been sympathetic to Karen's position in the month 22 discussion, but who, having now reviewed the complete documentation, voted with the majority. Donna told me in the parking lot afterward that she had not known about the first certified letter when she voted at month 22. Karen had described the situation to her as a neighbor who had overreacted to a parking habit without any prior formal communication. The first certified letter had been sent 9 months before the month 22 meeting. In the parking lot, Marcus Webb found me before I reached my car. He was professional and direct. He said, "The documentation is the documentation. I've reviewed it. My client has no viable legal path here." I said, "I know." He said, "The vehicle removal is going to cost her. Flatbed for a vehicle in a confined configuration." I said, "I know." He said, "She's going to have difficulty accepting that this is the outcome." I said, "That's been true since month 7. He looked at the parking lot. "Fair enough." He extended his hand. "You did this by the book." I shook it. 23 years of civil engineering, I said. "I know where the book is." He almost smiled. He left. Karen's husband, Douglas, was in the parking lot on the far side, standing beside their second car. He was a structural engineer who worked on commercial projects in the valley and who had been present at the second police report, but had otherwise been a peripheral figure in the situation. He said, "I told her to stop." I said, "I know." He said, "In month 8 and month 15, and after the HOA meeting," he looked at his keys, "she told me it was a minor habit and that you were making it into something larger than it was." I said, "The documentation is what it is." He said, "Yes." He looked at the community center. "The flatbed is coming Monday. I arranged it this afternoon." I said, "I'll make sure the center post spacing is accessible for the approach angle." He looked at me. "You thought about the flatbed approach angle?" I said, "I designed the installation. I know the clearances." He was quiet for a moment. "She's not going to apologize," he said. "I want you to know that's not because she doesn't understand she was wrong. It's because she's not at the point yet where she can say it." I said, "I understand." He said, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. On behalf of the 3 years of this." I said, "I appreciate that." He drove away. Cecilia was waiting by our car. She had been speaking with Patricia near the community center entrance. She said, "How was Douglas?" I said, "He arranged the flatbed. He apologized on her behalf." She said, "She's not going to apologize herself." I said, "No, not yet." She said, "Does that matter?" I thought about the notebook. 51 entries, 2 years and 9 months, 2 certified letters signed for and unacted upon, 2 police reports, 2 board findings, and 3 steel posts in concrete footings on my property installed to specification, permitted by the county within my boundary line, doing exactly what I had designed them to do. I said, "The outcome matters. The apology is separate." She nodded. We drove home. The flatbed came Monday morning. I had adjusted the center post access angle by standing at the driveway entrance and measuring the approach clearance the previous evening. The flatbed driver was experienced and careful. He cleared the posts by 6 inches on each side. The Audi lifted clean and rode away on the flatbed at 9:53 Monday morning. I stood at the driveway entrance after the flatbed left. The bollards stood where they had been set. 3 posts, clean and permanent, defining the boundary between my driveway and the street in a way that had not been ambiguous before, but was now also physically unambiguous. Entry 52 would be the last entry. I had decided this on Saturday when the concrete went in. The documentation had served its purpose. The installation was the resolution. I went inside, opened the notebook, wrote the final entry. October 19th, bollard installation complete, vehicle removed at owner's expense. HOA vote 5-0, documentation closed. I closed the notebook, filed it behind the property survey and the permit and the HOA correspondence. Cecilia came to find me at my desk. She looked at the closed notebook. She said, "Done." I said, "Done." She said, "How does it feel?" I thought about what it felt like to finish something that had required 2 years and 9 months of patient, methodical, professional effort. Not dramatic effort, the specific and unglamorous effort of recording dates and times and durations, and photographing a car in a driveway and writing letters, and attending meetings and waiting for the moment when the record was sufficient and the solution was ready. I said, "It feels like the right outcome arrived through the right process." She said, "That's a very engineer answer." I said, "It's the honest one." She sat on the corner of my desk. "She's going to sell." I said, "Probably." She said, "The new neighbors will see the bollards." I said, "The bollards are a feature of the property now. Anyone who looks at this house before buying will see 3 steel posts at the driveway entrance." She said, "And if they ask about them?" I said, "I'll tell them the driveway had an access issue and the posts resolved it." She said, "That's accurate." I said, "Yes." She looked at the window. Outside, the October light was doing what it does at this elevation, coming through the aspens at an angle that makes everything it touches look like the specific and unrepeatable version of itself that exists only in that moment. The bollards were visible from the window, 3 posts, straight and plumb, in the morning light. They would be there tomorrow and the day after, and for as long as I own the property and beyond, because concrete footings at 24 inches in Colorado granite do not fail. The driveway was mine. It had always been mine. Now it looked like it. Framed thumbnail text. 51 times she parked there. The 52nd was inside my concrete.